And then tonight, we're very happy to have the authors of When Truth Was Treason, Alan and Blair here. And you may have noticed we've had a bit of resurgence of interest in this topic over the last few years. The movie certainly helped with that. So they'll tell the story of why a book that was first published in 1995 is the subject of our discussion tonight. So thanks for coming tonight, and I give you Alan.
Right. That is an unusual thing, isn't it? Because normally you don't get used books, or not used books, but books, not new books, being signed. But the movie, Truth and Treason, as you know, is topical, and Richard Dewey has brought out a relatively new edition of the book. In fact, the one that you saw tonight is brand new cover on the new thing, so it's still new. But I think it's a timeless topic. I can't imagine a time in history where we need this lesson more than now. I've said on a few podcasts and so forth that we're facing really a tsunami of lies globally washing onto our shores. And what Helmut did was two things. He got the truth. I think in that case he was pretty lucky because he found that radio that his brother, Gerhard Kunkel, half-brother Gerhard Kunkel, had brought home. And then he had the courage to disseminate the truth. And thank you, Linda. I'd be happy to introduce you to Klaus Kunkel. Wave your hand, Klaus. Klaus is a nephew of Helmut. He's one of the 6 nephews that live in the Mountain West. And he is the son of Gerhard, the radio Kunkel. And he's become a good friend. Sitting next to him is Melanie Smith. Melanie Schnibbe Smith, who is the daughter of Carl Schnibbe's sister. So you're Carl's niece. And behind you is, I didn't see you until just now, Joan, is Joan Schnibbe, who is Carl Schnibbe's widow. And I'm not sure who else. I know a bunch of other people here, but I won't introduce them. My wife's here, of course, and I'm glad to see her old mission friend, Rick Cagle, down there. One person I do want to let you know is here, is Steve Smoot. Wave your arm, Steve. And his son, Stephen, Jr., also known as Sven, right? Yeah. And your wife, Amberly. I'm sorry, I come up with Emily. I have to get Emily out of the way before I get to Amberly. Stephen is a phenomenon. He recently discovered, and it came out in November 24, I think, a 500-plus page dossier that the Nazis were keeping on the Mormons, beginning in 1933, which shows pretty clearly that the Nazis didn't like the Mormons and the Mormons didn't like the Nazis, which puts to rest a lot of the arguments that you'll read in a book like Moroni and the Swastika, which essentially says that all the Mormons and all the Nazis were in bed together. Stephen's book shows that the Nazis didn't like us. They were watching us suspiciously. They say that guy in Salt Lake was constantly calling Hitler a murderer. That was the prophet. And so it was a wonderful thing that you found that. I got up to page 26, I think it was, or 27, when I stumbled onto the name of a Mormon elder who was being surveilled. His name was Keith Jensen from Huntsville, Utah. And I immediately recognized him as the father of my old mission companion, Marlon K. Jensen, who some of you know, used to be the church historian and was a member of the 70. So that was kind of fun. And I've sent those things. I've also included. I call it your book, Stephen. It's actually a complete volume of a journal. Would you remind us the name of the journal?
Latter-day Saint Historical Studies.
Thank you. To all practical purposes, it's a book on that subject, and you have the stuff in there in German, and it's translated, and it's a beautiful job. So, really pleased that you did that, because I was in a long review essay of Nelson's book, The Moroni and the Swastika. I was trying very hard to show, without any statistical evidence, that his argument that all the Mormons were pro-Nazi couldn't possibly be right. But I didn't have anything, any hard statistics. And this thing comes about as close. However, I later found out that a friend of mine had already sort of surveyed the Mormons, and this book makes the claim that the Mormons only joined the party as half as much as the normal Germans. But what's his name? Stephen, remind me, I'm blocking on his name now.
Alan Minor?
Roger Minor.
Roger Minor, yeah.
Yeah, he showed earlier, and I just didn't know this, that it was about 1/4 as many. So about 2.5% of the members, Minor calculated, joined the party. And the average German joined the party at 10%, which is interesting because most people think everybody in Germany was a Nazi and so forth. It was not true, and of course joining their party was a pretty official thing. So, but let me answer a question that was asked to me by who was it that asked me this question about the Monson case. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. There's quite a bit of misunderstanding about Helmut. And there's two main areas I'd like to touch on real briefly. I'm assuming that most of you know kind of who Helmut was and so forth. I'll get back to that, and we're going to do a question and answer very soon here, so we'll cover that. But one question that was asked to me when I was signing books up here was, what's the deal on Monson and this project? I discovered this project in 1971. I had just finished a PhD in German literature and language in Princeton, and I'd written a dissertation on a topic in post-war German literature, and I'd become interested in another author, a man named Günter Grass, who later won the Nobel Prize in literature. One of you was in my class, and we read Grass together. Who was that? Oh yeah, there you are. Tell me your name again, because
Ron Prentice.
this is Ron Prentice, a very famous name. When I put the name and the face together, I said, oh, that's Ron Prentice. And didn't he work with your son, Brian? Anyway, that's my old mission companion, friend, Rick Cagle. Anyway, long story short, I was reading all the books of Grass in succession, to fill in, and he had a lot of stuff. But he'd written 3 big novels, and he called it the Danzig trilogy. They were all set in the city of Danzig. The next novel he wrote is based on the character of Helmut Hübner. He had discovered Helmut Hübner in an obscure. He was living in Berlin at the time, Grass was, and in an obscure Hamburg newspaper, a very left-wing labor union periodical, he happened to have a subscription to. Meanwhile, back in Hamburg, in the 60s, a school teacher had said to his school class, go home and ask your parents and your neighbors, anybody you can find, if they knew anybody who was in the resistance during the war. And a young man named Uli Sander went home, and his dad had heard the word Helmut Hübner, the name. So Uli, bright young kid, went to visit the Helmut school teacher, a man named August Mainz. He went to visit the Mormons because he found out he was a Mormon. And he wrote a nice school essay, and I'm pretty sure he got an A on it, or a 1, as they say in German. And he was proud of it, and he offered it to this friend of his who happened to be the editor of this paper. So that's why that school essay became an article in a paper that Günter Grass saw. When he saw it, he wrote a whole novel about that, and it's called Local Anesthetic. And it's about dentistry, but it's really not about tooth decay, it's about societal decay. And what do? If you have a toothache, do you have it torn out by the roots? That's called radical, because the Latin root for radix means is root, right? So radical stuff means tearing it out by the root. And in 1968 in Germany, it was much worse even than in the United States. I mean, we had Martin Luther King assassinated and Bobby Kennedy, and we had riots in Watson, in Detroit, and lots of other places. But in Germany, I would say it was on steroids. They were really upset, and the young people were very upset. And the hero of this young novel, or a young hero of this novel, is the brightest kid in school, and he's going to protest the war in Vietnam and some other things he doesn't like by burning himself. There was a lot of that self-immolation going on, and Buddhist monks in Vietnam. There was a famous case in Prague, Jan Palach, who burned himself to protest the Soviet army coming into Prague to put down what they called the Prague Spring. And there's a really important monument to him there in Prague. That was 68. So this is why Grass has this kid wanting to burn himself. But then and of course it's shocking to everybody. But then the kid figures out, wait a minute, Germans have seen this before. In Hamburg, at the end of 43, no, in the summer of 43, end of July, Helmut's mother and his grandparents were both burned to death in what we called Operation Gomorrah. We were pouring fire and brimstone on Hamburg. And they got a firestorm going, which means that the atmosphere is a chimney, and the air flows into the fire at hurricane velocities, killing people and throwing buses at them and so forth. And 40,000 people died in those 2-3 nights, including Helmut's mom and Emma and her mother and her mother's husband. Those are the two people that he had written a final letter to. But Marie Sommerfeld, Helmut had written another letter to her, and that letter survived. And when we met Marie here in Salt Lake on South Temple, interviewed her, her son Werner was there, and she had the letter, except she didn't have it. She said, I lost it on the way over here, but I know it out by heart, so I'll write you down a copy. So we're relying on her memory, which I think is reliable. And Werner's still alive, and he's the last person who remembers Helmut Hübner person. He's 96. And I should have had him here tonight, but I couldn't arrange it. So I'm wandering a little bit, but the point is that when I saw that book, I want to tell you what about this kid. He finally gives up the idea of burning himself because he figured Germans are, they're inured to this. I'm going to burn my dog. That'll get him, because Germans love dogs. This is getting more ridiculous, but that gets the teacher upset because he knows that he's going to get in trouble now. So he goes to his house, and long story short, he sees that the kid has already discovered Helmut Hübner. On the wall, he's got a picture of this. He's got that newspaper thing there, including his picture, pinned up. And for the rest of the novel, then, the kid changes his mind. He doesn't kill himself. He doesn't kill his dog. He becomes the editor of the school paper. Because if you're following Hübner, you're going to find the truth and you're going to write about it. And that's what Gross did his whole career, actually. And in the lead article of the school paper that he takes on, he's turned it down many times. He compares the activities in 1941 of Helmut Hübner and Kurt Georg Kiesinger, who was the Bundeskanzler, the chancellor at the time, who had been a Nazi, had a very bad Nazi past, and in 1941 was doing Nazi things. So that's how I got interested in this. And I had just come to BYU to teach, and I remember right at the end of my first semester, 71, I was sitting in my office, it was snowing outside, it was Christmas vacation, I was under no pressure, and I had this big flakes of snow going down, kind of in a Grimm's fairy tale. And I thought, wait a minute, some of these guys came to Salt Lake City. By the way, in the novel only has Helmut Hübner's name, but the article, which I then got a hold of, has Carl Schnibbe's name, Rudy Wobbe's name, and I thought, I wonder. And I'm not proud of myself because it took me a while to think of this. I pulled out the Salt Lake phone book. I looked up Carl Schnibbe. Was it 272-5773?
That's my present number.
Right. That's the number.
But no, the one that you called was not that.
Oh, it wasn't that number. That was the one I remembered. Anyway, I dialed his number. He answered. He said, I've been waiting for this phone call for 25 years. So that's how this started out. I visited Carl. By the way, in the meantime, I went downstairs where there was a professor of history that I knew named Douglas Tolbert. I asked him if he'd like to be involved in this, and it was a good thing because he was a good interviewer. He knew a lot of background. He was a professor of Mormon history in Germany. And so he and I interviewed these people, and he was a good interviewer. He got Carl mad at him one time. Joan, do you remember this? Because he scattered popcorn on the floor.
No, I didn't.
You don't remember that?
No.
Yeah, you brought in a bowl of popcorn, and Doug was stuffing it in his mouth, and it got all over the place, and Carl got all upset about it. Carl had been in concentration or prison camps for a lot of years, 7 or something like that. And Joan would agree with it. There were a few things we had to sometimes just, because he himself said, I was lewd, rude, and crude when I came out of those camps. But anyway, it was a great thing. So now we got a hold of Rudy Wobbe. I visited your father, Gerhard, and his brother Hans, Klaus. And I visited Marie Sommerfeld and so forth. So that's how the thing got started. I didn't mean to go off on this tangent, but I did. But what I would like to do, I wanted to get ahead to the point where I could say to you, at some point, Doug Tolbert didn't like to write stuff. He wanted to get the last fact before he wrote. My brain was full of facts and it was swirling around, as you can see. I said, I got to write this stuff down so it doesn't slide away. So I started writing an article which turned out to be the Führer's new clothes. And it came out in 1980 in Sunstone magazine. Peggy Fletcher, who is now Fletcher Stack at the Tribune, was the editor, and she made a cover. It was the cover article. Nice big swastika, red, attracts attention. While I was writing that, the College of Humanities asked me to give a lecture about it to the Humanities College faculty. And while I was talking, I looked up, and there was a guy that later became a very close friend, but I didn't know him very well, but I'd heard that he'd studied drama at Yale. It was Tom Rogers, professor of Russian, who'd served his mission 10 years before I was in Hamburg. He'd actually heard of the Huebner story in Hamburg, but had not told me about it. Anyway, I stopped and I said, Tom, this is exceptionally dramatic material. Why don't you make a play about this? And I handed him my paper, my manuscript as he was going out the door. And he did. And he entitled his play Huebner. And it went, didn't you say it was about 76,
It
Joan?
was October 7th, 76 that it opened.
You remember that. That's amazing. I'm glad to hear that. And it was very popular. They had it in a small theater, experimental theater in the former Fine Arts Center, which is gone now. And but it was so popular that they were going to extend the run. When I got a call from Dallin Oaks, who was president of the BYU at the time, and he said, Elder Monson, and I knew, and he knew that I knew, was in charge of Germany, right? He was the apostle to the Germans. And he was working at that time with the East Germans. He said, Elder Monson just called and would ask, and wants me to ask you if you guys wouldn't delay that a little while. And I immediately said, well, does he have something against it, or what's the deal? And he said, I didn't think to ask him. I'll call him back. So a couple of days later, he called me back. And it turned out he and Monson had actually gone to one of the performances the night before. I didn't know they were there. And he called me back and he said, Elder Monson says he has no objection to this. It's just that there's something he can't tell you about, this secret. And he's just asking a favor if you would delay it for just a little while. And those are the words that were emphasized. So oddly enough, I'm usually the firebrand, but Tolbert was mad. Tom was mad. I'm the one who said, let's keep calm and carry on. Eventually, it didn't take long to find out that Monson was negotiating at that very moment with East Germany at the highest level, Erich Honecker. And he did not want Honecker to think that Mormons are people who would go try to overthrow the government, especially a totalitarian government. Now, there's all kinds of ironies tangled up in this because anti-fascists are heroes to communists, right? And there would have been no danger whatsoever that the East Germans would have thought, oh, these guys are going to overthrow us. In fact, Honecker's close friend, Stefan Hermelin, had written a book with a number of chapters in it detailing famous German resistance fighters, including Helmut Huebner. There's a chapter in Stefan Hermelin's book. So I wouldn't be surprised I would be very surprised actually if Honecker hadn't already known about Huebner. But Elder Monson was taking no chances. But I'd like to put to rest the idea that, because it came up in Nelson's book again, and even a friend of mine not long ago in a discussion, who was a very well-informed guy, blurted out, oh yeah, the Brethren shut down Tom's play. Oh yeah, So it goes to the problem.
That's kind of what the Moroni and swastika.
Do you see a Moroni and swastika here somewhere?
It's on the wall there, but that's kind of what it alluded to.
No, he says it more or less in that many terms. By the way, he and I get along fine. We're good friends. I signed Upper Pro book signing. He came to visit me and Linda at a conference in 2000 in Copenhagen in Denmark. It was commemorating the 150th anniversary of the first 4 Mormon missionaries in Scandinavia, which happened to include a great-great-great-grandfather of mine, George Parker Dykes, who also helped John Taylor translate the Book of Mormon into German in 1852. And he wanted me to sign a copy of the original, some of you have the hardback, which I was happy to do. Then when I got that book, because BYU Studies asked me to review it, it came from Dewey himself. No, you're Dewey. No, he's Dewey. He's Nelson. Sorry, dude. Oh my gosh. I'm 3 days older than Joe Biden, so give me a little. He put a photograph inside that showed what I'd written in this thing. I said, I hope you'll be able, because he had said to me, I'm really excited about this, and I want to get a PhD in German history and Mormon German history. And so I wrote, well, I hope you'll be able to expand the margins of this story and stuff. So anyway, and I'm glad he did the book because it's got a lot of important information in it. But his conclusions that he comes to, I just don't understand why his PhD committee or his editorial board at University of Oklahoma Press wouldn't have noticed this and said, well, wait a minute. What you're saying here does not align with what your conclusions are. Because I think if you read that book, you'll see that just statistically, just anecdotally, in terms of the sum of the anecdotes on the one side versus the other, the Mormons are not as bad as he paints them. But even in 1980 or so, when we were doing, or 76, when this was happening, he says that the Keele and Tobler and Rogers were, we were, I can't remember the language, but it was very strong language. We were coerced. We were threatened with the termination of our employment, things like that. And so it makes it sound like the Mormons in 1976 were also completely in the pocket of the Nazis. But it gets more interesting, if you don't mind this diatribe. President Monson, not long after the Tom Rogers play was, I don't want to say it was killed, but it didn't actually pick up and it didn't go out. We didn't have a longer run even thereafter. So effectively it did sort of die right there. Although when Tom was a mission president in Russia, he translated his play and he was playing it to whoever would listen to it in Moscow, which was kind of cool. And I heard one funny story from one of his missionaries. There was some general authority going to visit, and Tom came in and said, "Quick, get rid of all the evidence." So they hid all the costumes and the manuscripts and stuff. But another play came out on the subject, and this was a guy named David Anderson, I think it was, and it was played in the Shire West Theater, and Lynn and I went to it. And apparently after that, someone put a microphone in Monson's face and said, "Oh, here's another Huebner story. What do you think about this?" And fatally, Brother Monson said, "Well," he says, "I don't know why we keep bringing these things up." And then he said, and this is really, this is awful. He said, "Who knows who was right back then and who wasn't, you know? The shades of, there were some really good people on both sides or something like that, right?" Yeah. So that was embarrassing. And that got the attention of B'nai B'rith, the Jewish, anti-Jewish, Anti-Defamation League. And they came out and they interviewed him and they said, "What's the story here? You know, hot news is Mormon apostle, is he pro-Nazi and so forth?" And poor President Monson, I felt bad for him. He was like, "Whoa, did I say that?" I'll give you an example though. Rudy Vobbe was convinced that someone had gotten to Monson. Because, when Monson was a young bishop, and there's all kinds of famous stuff about how he was in his 20s and he helped all these people. He had this sort of low income ward in Central. There were a lot of Germans in that area, and they had immigrated here, and they didn't have any language skills and so forth, so a lot of them were LDS chapel custodians and so forth, and there were an awful lot of them in his ward. So Rudy got the idea that maybe somebody had gotten to him. And I don't know if you mind me mentioning this, but there were people who did not like the Huebner story, including, may I?
Sure.
Your mom, who was Carl's sister. And then there was Arthur Zander, who was here at the time. He was the president. In the film, he's the bishop. I think that's much simpler to say. And so there were people, and so Rudy thought, I wonder if some of those people have gotten to Monson. In fact, isn't it true that your mom wrote at least 2 letters to Monson?
I think I have one copy.
Right.
But I think they were frightened.
I know.
I mean, what happened to that?
Yeah, no.
I mean,
Glad you mentioned this. Yeah, because you have to understand. There's a kid in their branch, and he gets arrested. He's broken the 12th Article of Faith, right? Because the 12th Article of Faith says, don't do this, support them.
93.
Right? And then he gets himself killed, and that's horrifying. But the thing that really emotionally stuck with people, and I've seen this over and over again, He could have got us killed. And that's still, I met a woman in Provo or Orem just a few months ago, whom I had never seen before, but who's lived in Utah for a long time, and was one of those, that generation. Somehow this came up, and she gave me the full thing. Oh, those dumb kids, they could have got us killed, and blah, blah, blah. So Rudy goes in to get his temple recommend signed by the stake presidency. It's a second counter-signature, as you know. And they ask him the standard question, do you support the leaders of the church? And he said, yeah, I'll accept that guy Monson. so it turns out that the stake presidency type guy, and I don't know if it was president or counselor, it doesn't matter, he was a friend of Monson's. So he calls him up, Tom, I got a kid here. Can he come see you? So apparently, he marched him right over to the church office building and sat down with Monson. And Monson said, I'm so sorry that happened. He says, I assure you, I have no sympathy with the Nazis. I am absolutely behind you guys. I support you 100% and all that stuff. So when Rudy came out and reported that to us, then I drew a line under it. Right? But that story's out there, and it has legs. And like I said, this friend of mine just recently said, the brethren shut Tom down. But the other thing that kind of goes in that same direction, if you don't mind me yakking away, there's an article that came out a while back in the church website on Helmut Hübner. And I was happy that the church was now telling people about Helmut Hübner. And Dieter Uchtdorf spontaneously talks about it. We go to a thing in November every year if we can. It's on a Sunday morning. It's at the Fort Douglas Cemetery. It's a celebration, or it's a commemoration of some German POWs who were murdered in Utah. Any of you, raise your hand if you know this case. Some do, most people don't.
Down in Salina or something?
It was in Salina. I grew up in Wayne County down here, so I used to go through Salina. I know Mom's Cafe. Right up the street a little bit, and slightly uphill, there was a camp. And they're rebuilding it now as a museum. And they had German prisoners of war in there. In fact, I just met a guy, I haven't met him personally yet, but I just made acquaintance with a guy who said his father was kind of in charge of that. He'd been a Mormon missionary earlier, and when these German POWs started being brought to Utah, they asked this kid to kind of organize it. And so he knew about this a lot more than I did. His name is, Rick, what did I say his last name was? I told you about him at lunch.
Kuko?
No, Paul Carpenter. He was in our mission, but his dad was there earlier, and as a German speaker, I don't think he was in charge of anything, but he was very closely connected to it. Anyway, what happened was, on one evening, you can Google this, it's called the Salina Massacre. A young, apparently mentally ill PFC American kid, whom they had not ever trusted with a gun, and he'd never gone to the front. This was in July 45. The war was over in Europe, but we hadn't dropped the atomic bombs yet. And this kid came on duty at midnight, and he had a cup of coffee down at Mom's Cafe, and he said to the waitress, there's going to be some excitement up at the camp tonight. And he climbed the tower when he got there, the guard tower, took the cover off the .30 caliber machine gun, and opened up on the tents. And he killed 8 outright. He cut 1 in half. And he killed eight outright. 1 died the next morning. There were, I think, 28 others or 18 others, I've forgotten now, who were wounded. They put them all in a little hospital not far from there in Salina. And they say that blood was coming out of the hallway and down the front steps of the thing. So those guys who were buried, the rest of them, they healed them up and sent them home. And but Elder Uchtdorf takes a special interest in this ceremony they have on a certain Sunday. And I don't know, you never tell which one it is. It's the first Sunday after the full moon in July, whatever. But it corresponds with what Germans call the Volkstrauertag, the National Day of Mourning in Germany. And the first time we heard Uchtdorf was a couple of years, 3 years ago. He started out his sermon with the Helmut Hübner story, because he said, I want to tell you something about somebody who did the right thing, who loved others and told the truth and stuff, didn't mow them down with a machine gun and so forth. So we knew Uchtdorf was on our side. We knew that the Monson thing, it was kind of a dog's breakfast in terms of a mess. And then when we published our first little book on Helmut with Bookcraft, it was called The Price, The True Story of a Mormon Who Defied Hitler. They took the book and said, yes, we'll publish it. Then they said, oh, it's too long. They kept throwing stuff out, and we were pulling our hair out. And finally they said, what happened is they decided how long it was going to be and how much it was going to cost before they looked at the book. They said, this is going to cost $7.95 and it's going to be pretty short. And they did not say, even though I've been quoted as having said this, that our readers moved their lips. But the point is, they sold 15,000 copies right off the bat, but I had 14,999 complaints that it was too short. So then we somehow managed the copyright thing, and we got the University of Illinois to do it. Anyway, that's just, I will tell you this, one final thing, and then I'll get to some questions. I actually started with this a minute ago. They finally came out with an article on Helmut Hübner. I was very pleased to hear it. I got an email from Uli Sander. Remember him? The kid in Hamburg who'd written the original essay. He didn't live in Hamburg anymore, but he and I were friends. At least he was. I was friends with him until recently, when he decided to tell everybody that he thought it was Joe Biden linked up with those Nazis in Ukraine who had invaded Russia. So as it turns out, as a communist, he was a great anti-fascist, but he really liked those, we call it in Germany, he was blind on his left eye. So if it came from Russia, he bought it. So we're not close friends anymore, although we're friendly. But, let's see, I've lost my train of thought as usual.
The church essay.
Ah, yes, thank you. Thank you. You've got to come with me from now on. I got an email from him. And it was a forwarded email from a German guy in Frankfurt who works for the church as a PR, named Ralf Grünke, asking him, would you look over this draft of this new article that's going in the church website about Helmut Hübner? And he forwarded it to me, saying, well, this guy must be nuts. He says, I don't know English and I'm not a Mormon. What are you doing? So I looked at this article, and and then I wrote Grünke, and I said, what's the deal? He said, oh, I sent that to him by mistake. I'm sorry, I meant to send it to you. So I took that to be an invitation, and I stayed up all night, that very night, correcting the errors, and there were about 50 of them. And some of them were pretty serious. And then I sent it in, and I heard crickets. And then I see the article that's come out, and it has none of the corrections in it. It's all the mistakes are still in there. So I'm not sure what happened. My theory is that somebody got the cart before the horse, and they went to the translation department and had it translated into a gazillion languages. And so they just didn't want to do anything with it. But I can make short work of this story, I hope. I eventually found out who'd written the article, and it turned out he was really stubborn. I thought he was a moron at first, but then I later met him. He was quite smart. So judge not that you be no judge. But the fact is that these errors are in there. And I'll talk to you about the main error that really stuck in my craw. It says in there, the church excommunicated Helmut, and that after the war he was reinstated. Okay, that sounds pretty innocent, but it's not true. What actually happened is this bishop from the film, if you've seen the film, was Bishop Sander, or Branch President Sander, Arthur Sander, who was also in Salt Lake, and we interviewed him. We tried to, but he wouldn't. His wife wanted us to interview him, so she said, oh, come in, yes. We made an appointment with her. She said, yeah, come down. So we drive down. We go in the house. Come on in. He's right here. He retreated through the house. It's a shotgun house. He went down into his basement, and Tolbert and I followed him in there. And we said, all we want to do is talk to you. And we're very neutral. We're very objective about this. He said, no. He says, I'll tell my own story sometime. And by the way, we were surrounded by soccer paraphernalia, because Arthur Sander is also known as the father of Utah soccer. He started soccer teams at BYU and everywhere else. And there's a young man now who's in the soccer business. That means he works for an organization that has, I can't remember the name of them. I think it's a youth soccer thing or something. And he's very interested in it. And he's begun to interview Sander's children about the soccer part of the business. Now I've lost my train of thought. Where was I going?
So he's the one that was tried to excommunicate.
Oh yeah, okay, here's the thing. He wrote excommunicated on a piece of paper, and he announced it in church. But that doesn't mean he's excommunicated. my brother-in-law, Linda's brother-in-law, Elder Melvin Hammond of the 70, now retired. When I was telling him the story, he said, wait a minute. He said, branch presidents can't excommunicate anybody. In a mission, only the mission president can do it. I thought, oh, that's interesting. So he wrote that. And I think it was a good thing that he did. Because he was a member of the party himself, but giving him even a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, he probably saved the ward or the branch there and a lot of other people from repercussions. The film does a good job of that, especially in the 3-hour, 4-part streaming series. He says to his wife, and I was there when they were filming that, I watched that whole scene. He says, you know, we're doing this. She's, of course, what do you mean, you know? You're protecting the ward like you did with Solomon Schwartz and so forth, so she's not buying it, but I think he had a good intention. But here's what actually happened. After the war, the First Presidency was told about this, and they wrote the cause to be written on the membership record, which is about this size, and it's in a book. I saw it with my own eyes during that wonderful Camelot era when Arrington was the church president and normal mortals like me could get into the archives. I saw this with my own eyes. I'm probably the first person to see it since 1948. In a beautiful hand, 45 degrees across this, it says, decision of excommunication reversed by the First Presidency, who caused this notation to be placed upon this record. Now you have to think about that with a lawyer's mind, my son Jeremy. Decision of excommunication reversed. Was there an excommunication? If the decision was reversed? I argue that it was a non-excommunication at that point. I argue that they actually thought that through pretty carefully and didn't say reinstated by the First Presidency. That's what the website article said, right? You're following me? I've lost you on this yet? You have a question?
But when he thought he had the authority.
No, actually, there's an interesting thing. We recently found an article or a document by Sonder claiming innocence and saying, who are these two Lugan lords, these two lords of lying, Tobler and Keele, who are, you know, who are slandering my name and so forth all around. And it said, I didn't do that. The mission president told me to do it, and it was handed down to me by Otto Berndt, and then I just signed it. But that's a lie, because Otto Berndt, we've interviewed him at great length, and his son, Otto Jr., they were great.
So he's just following.
And he said that they all said that it was Saunders' idea. I think it was a good idea, but after the fact, he can't come back and say, I didn't do that.
And like after what he did with Solomon Schwartz, how can you say he had good intentions? Like,
well, I don't say his intentions were good. I just think it was successful in keeping the Gestapo away from his own family. I think the film does a good job because he explains to his wife, look, he's using the typewriter that I loaned him. He's using the branch mimeograph machine. We're screwed. As soon as the Gestapo finds out about that, we're screwed. And the family's gone, and so's the ward. You know, so's the branch. So, in that sense, I thought it was a good thing. It's too bad, though, that he didn't have the insight to say, oh, yeah, I made a terrible mistake, and I'm sorry about that. But he didn't. And human psychology is such that, and we're finding this out more and more, if you back if you're a cult member and you believe in somebody at the cult level, it's not easy for you to turn around and say, I was wrong about that. So anyway, so I was happy to, but long story short, I spent about 4 years hitting my head against a brick wall trying to get them to change that. And there were many other things in there that didn't make the church look good. One of the other things I'll mention to you is that this article said, and the other day it dawned on me, I wonder if this guy had AI write that thing for him. The article said, Helmut was the most famous resistance fighter in Nazi Germany. And, more famous than the White Rose and the Stauffenberg group of officers and many others. And you know who he blamed that on? Karl. Because Karl had said stuff like that. But Karl was a sweetheart who'd come to the United States and was decorating temples and gold leafing Symphony Hall and doing those kinds of things that he did. But I think he was excited that we were writing, helping him write his book now and his books. So he'd made statements somehow in public that got written down somewhere that this guy had access to, that made those kinds of statements. So I finally confronted the guy. I said, that's not true, and it makes the church look bad. It's like, na 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 na, we have the best hero and you don't. You know? And he said, no, Carl said it, and Carl's the best witness, and it's true. Carl was a great eyewitness of things that he knew about. But I said, Carl knows nothing, no offense to Carl, he knows nothing about how many books have been written about Carl Hübner, and he knows has no idea. I mean, if a German was drinking a cup of coffee and you said to him, Helmut Hübner is the most famous resistance fighter, he would blow coffee out of his nose, snorting with derision. Okay, it was just completely wrong. So this is another one of the things I was trying to get changed. And there were a bunch of other things. But I'm happy to say, and I'll make this short, that after 1 year of my personal correspondence with a man named Jeffrey Holland, trading on our friendship from BYU, we managed to get that stuff changed. But it took phone calls from Holland, at the end of which he would email me and say, seniority does have its advantages sometimes. But it wasn't a short story. If you'd like to hear the whole story, I have it in a little essay I wrote called, do you want to hear the title? A Panegyric to a Departed Prophet. You would know what a panegyric is.
Right, it's a paean or a praise. It's a poem of praise.
It's a poem of praise, a kind of a loud one in the public square, as opposed to a eulogy. It's kind of like a eulogy on steroids, would you say?
Yeah, there's often dancing involved,
No,
I
that's
think.
right, yeah. But anyway, so if anyone would want that, all you have to do is ask me for it. I'm at akeele@gmail. Alan Keele, Keele. Anyway, so I think that's probably more than enough rambling around. What questions do you have for me?
Do you know which first presidency reversed the excommunication?
Oh, that's a good question, and you caught me flat-footed. It was in '48.
Oh, okay.
It had to have been,
It was early.
yeah, it was right after they found out about this. Okay, it was, 45 to 48, yeah.
George Albert Smith.
It would have been George Albert Smith,
I think so.
and I'm not sure who his
David
counselors
O'Mackey
were.
and J. Reuben.
And Clark.
Or was it Clark? J. Reuben, and who did you say the other?
David
David
O'Mackey.
O'Mackey.
And David O'Mackey, that's right. Because Joan is linked in there to that time period. Your ancestor was
Well, I had him.
George Q. Cannon.
Okay, that was my great-grandfather.
Right.
My grandfather was an apostle also.
What was your grandfather's name?
Sylvester Q. Cannon.
Ah, Sylvester
But
Q.
he died like in 1943.
Okay,
so-
yeah. But I think that's the answer to your question.
So I read someplace, maybe from you, I don't know, that the bishop said it was a good thing that Hübner was guillotined, and it saved him the trouble of doing it himself. Is that true, or did you get it from the other books?
Well, yes and no. I would say, as the Germans say, Jein, right, which is ja and nein. It's reported that one guy in the branch said, wow, if I'd known what he was doing and if I'd had a gun, I would have shot him. And then somebody else said, oh, that was what Saunders said. So I don't know. Either one of them said it or both of them did, possibly. But I don't know the guillotine part, no. But I can tell you that the tenor of this document that I found recently is bitterness and anger. And it's not and he's not a calm, collected individual. You can tell he's taking it out on the typewriter, and his spelling and stuff. It's an outburst of real rage that these Lügen lords, these lying lords, Keele. And why hasn't the church excommunicated those guys? And if I was wrong, then why wasn't I excommunicated? That's what he says at the end of it. So it's a real outburst of anger, and so it's possible that he has something like that. And of course he did, and people reminded me of this when I said, you did it tonight. This thing that he did with Solomon Schwartz was, that was nasty. And I haven't told you this, but I interviewed Solomon Schwartz's half-sister in Hamburg. I don't remember her name right now. And she was convinced that Sonder had turned in Schwartz to the Gestapo, her brother, her half-brother. And by the way, if you're interested, the movie can't slow down the locomotive that for that much time. Well, what happened was Solomon's mother, Anna Maria Feder was her name, and Anna Maria's mother was captured from Austria and was taken to the out into Transylvania, the German-speaking part of Lithuania, where Dracula's from. Remember? Did I say?
Romania.
I said Romania. Did I say Romania? Yeah. Oh, I said Lithuania. Sorry, I was slipping the tongue. Thank you. I failed to introduce my dear friend and collaborator, Blair Holmes. He has a bad back. He wants to stay sitting down. Plus, I'm the one with the gift of gab, I guess. Blah, blah. But Blair did so much work on this book. The book would not exist if it weren't for Blair. He did all the footnotes, found all the documents, compiled them all. Translated many of them into English himself. Has now redone all that stuff in German, because this is now coming out in a full version. The German version originally was only half that long, because the publisher in Germany said, we don't care about the 4 years in Russian prison. We've had lots of those stories, but now we do, so that book's supposedly coming out. And now where did I get to?
She was a prisoner in Russia.
Carl was.
Transylvania.
No, sorry, she was. Now, thank you. Good thing you gals are here. Yeah, she was a prisoner, a civilian prisoner of war, and she was raped by some guy out there. She thought he was Jewish, so she named her son Solomon. And unfortunately, he looked a little bit like the stereotypes in those days, of Jews. And people have asked me, how did she know he was Jewish? And I said, I don't know. Maybe the instrument of his rape was circumcised? But that's where it comes from. In the film, they say he's half Jewish because his mother was Jewish or something. That's not, or his mother was half Jew or something. That's just let's get on down the track. Okay, sorry about that. Was that an adequate answer?
Yes.
Oh, I will say this. I told Elder Holland in one of my emails to him about a guy in our ward recently who stood up and said, I wasn't there mercifully, we were gone somewhere, in Sunday school, and said he was getting really fed up with these woke libs who are trashing the Constitution. And he's about to get his AR-15 and go full-on Captain Moroni on these guys.
Oh, no.
And apparently there was a real dead silence in the room, into which his wife blurted out, oh, don't worry, I have the keys to his gun case. I shared that with Elder Holland. And I know the guy, he's a nice guy, but clearly just, he's drunk the Kool-Aid, but never mind. I put that in the context of people threatening to shoot Huebner in the ward. Sorry.
I'm wondering if you could talk more about any other anachronisms or errors in the film that bugged you.
Yeah. That's an important question because people do ask me a lot. I was at first I didn't understand the difference between a documentary film and a dramatic film, and I got over to Lithuania, invited by the guys. I was there for a couple of weeks in June of '24, and we were filming that scene with the bishop up in his room telling his wife that, and he was making the document and so forth, the sign that said Jews not allowed to come and stuff. And I thought it was being helpful to Matt, and I said, Helmut actually didn't use the mimeograph machine that much. He may have tried to, but we don't have any, none of the leaflets ever turned in was a mimeograph machine, a leaflet, blah, blah, blah. And he was very kind to me, but I realized immediately that he said, look, it's twice as dramatic if the guy has given him two things, typewriter and mimeograph machine. Besides, there was that scene where he finds, under the mimeograph machine, the bishop finds a leaflet, right? And he thinks he maybe go to turn it in. That didn't happen, but it makes for a marvelous dramatical moment. So I suddenly had a complete shift. You remember that film that came out a while back called Escape from Germany?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I had a friend, in fact, it's the same guy that we talked about earlier, what's his name?
Minor.
Roger Meinert. He was hanging around, and he's a great guy, and he knows German culture so well, better than anybody I know. And he said, "Did you see those uniforms? They were Hungarian uniforms." And they had the swastika on the wrong arm, and he went on and on. So I was kind of in that mode when I got over there, but I realized I was wrong. So there are things in the film that I think are absolutely brilliant that need to be there. And some of them are switched for a little bit. I'll give you an example. In the trial, what happened was when they arrested those boys, Carl was a little older, and he was a little smarter, and he was a little scareder, I'll be honest, and that film picks that up. And Carl used to say that all the time, "Boy, I was scared." And so when they put a spy in his cell, and the kid comes in and says, "Hey, what are you in here for?" Carl said, "I was jaywalking." And then he said, "You want to hear what I'm in here for? I killed my grandmother with an axe, or my mother with an axe." And Carl says, "I didn't want to hear that." And Rudy, they put the guy, not the same guy, but they put his spy in his cell, and they said, "What are you in here for?" And Rudy was just 14 years old. He said, "Well, we had this radio, and then we listened to it, and we made these things, and we distributed them." So Rudy gets 10 years, and Carl gets 5. But in this film, it's switched, if you remember. And that's because they were playing on a very important but very true fact that they were looking to kill Carl. It would have been easier for him because he was now an adult. It would have been no problem whatsoever. There was actually, believe it or not, there was actually a lot of problem killing a juvenile, even in Nazi Germany. There were a lot of people who pushed back on it. I was in Leipzig a year ago, and I was invited by this lawyer who was a member of the church there, and he had a lot of his friends. It was a pretty high-level legal club, and I was speaking to these guys. After my talk, they got in a heated argument about how that could possibly have happened, that they killed a minor. I listened for a while, and I should have shut up, but I said, it's pretty funny. This was Nazi Germany. And yet, there's a really strict thing in the German legal code, apparently, about killing minors. So it would have been the path of least resistance for the court to kill Carl. And it's very important that Helmut stands up and literally saves Carl's life, and maybe Rudy's too, by focusing the anger of the court on himself. And that is literally what happened. But it wouldn't have looked good in the film to have given Carl 5 years and Rudy 10, so they just swapped that. Which makes sense now when you look at the film. They give Rudy 5 and Carl 10, and that makes some sense, right? Joan?
Nicia, the director's wife, told me that before I saw the film on the premiere, she said, "You're going to notice that it says Carl got 10 and Rudy got 10."
Warned you.
And she said, "We did that because when we previewed the film, people were really confused why the older kid didn't get 10 and Rudy get 5.
Interesting. They tried that out and it backfired on them.
Well, people didn't understand.
People said, "What's this?" Yeah. Oh, okay. I didn't know that they had that stage in the middle. It made sense to me, and I thought, fine. So I'm not one who insists on this being a documentary. Also, the film completely leaves out the role of another person who was tried with them at the same time, a guy named Gerhard Düver. Gerhard Düver was, well, we get back to this article on the church website. One of the errors in there was it said Helmut had 3 friends in the war, Carl, Rudy, and Gerhard Düver. Düver was an acquaintance at work. He was a fellow apprentice at the municipal offices in Hamburg. And Helmut handed him a leaflet one day, and he took it and looked at it and put it in his pocket. So Helmut I'm making a lot of this up because I wasn't there. Helmut must have gotten encouraged by that, and he gave a leaflet to another young boy named Werner Kranz. And Werner Kranz said, "Whoa, this is," and the German term is Defaitismus. It's defeatism. In other words, this is treason. And he shoved it back in his hand, and the guy in the office of the observatory, or the observer in the office observer, a guy named Heinrich Mons, saw this exchange and said to Kranz, "What was that?" He said, "Well, he gave me this leaflet." "Well, where is it?" He said, "Well, he took it back." So Kranz, Mons then goes to Helmut and says, "Where's this leaflet?" He said, "Oh, I destroyed it." But then Düver steps forward and says, "Well, here's one." Right? So, but after the war, now they became friends on the during their prisoner. Now, Helmut was kept and was eventually killed, of course. But the other two, Carl and Rudy, became friends with this Duver guy because he was a nice guy, and he actually did a wonderful thing that's in this book. Part of the documents is it's about a 30-page thing, isn't it? A 30-page, the account of their trek out of Poland in January '45 through deep snow. He took shorthand and stuff. Then he was a shorthand teacher and type teacher, and he kept a wonderful daily log of this trip, which is in the book. And so I'm happy for Duver, but at getting home after the war now, he's kind of a hero, right? Because he was a resistance fighter and he's been in prison and so forth. And so, and of course he gets money, he gets reparation money. And so he says a few things like, hey, yeah, I was a big part of this thing, you know, I was distributing those leaflets and I was listening to the radio and stuff. And he also said, he was quoted as having said that there was a printer up in Keele, and they were printing these by the thousands, and we had lots of people distributing them all over Hamburg. We were papering the streets with them and stuff. Now, it turns out he actually didn't say that. I saw about this time last winter, the document in Hamburg. What he said was, you know, if we hadn't been caught, I had this friend in Keele who had a printing press, and we could have done these things. But that got, telephone tag, is that the word? That got changed, and so this came out, and it was in the article on the so forth. They leave Duver out, but that's not because they, don't want Duver involved. But you have to streamline a film. They also left out Hans Kunkel, your uncle. But and Hans Kunkel's kids said, "Hey, how come our dad's not in this film?" Yeah. So you have to streamline. There are some places where they actually switch stuff around. And they made up a few things. I thought they'd made up the girlfriend. I apologize most profusely to my friend here because in his book, Hübner versus Hitler, he had said he had a girlfriend. And I said, wow, he just must have made that up. What I realized was after I left the scene, you interviewed the Kunkels much more thoroughly than I did, and you'd have to ask them the question, did he have a girlfriend? And they said, yes, of course. So they take that girlfriend. He didn't work at they didn't work at the same office, so that's a fictionalization, but you can see why that's an acceptable thing to do, because she's now in the office. And so there are things like that. But I'll just say this as a blanket statement. Nothing in that film bothers me in the slightest of that type, and I could not be happier with that film, especially when you see the full 3-hour version. I just think Matt and his people were, I just couldn't, it leaves nothing for me to wish happened a little bit differently in it. Linda Kay?
You might tell them how to get the 3 sections.
Oh, if you want to see the 3?
Yeah.
Well, Chris isn't here, but I sent those links. There's 4 links. It's a 4-part thing. So you can get it one or two ways. You can either email akeele@gmail.com and I'll send it directly to you. Because what happened is Linda and I invested in the film. Well, not much. There's a few thousand. But we wanted to prove to Matt that our hearts were in this, and we wanted to help out. Because Matt had been knocked down twice in the 2008 housing crash. He lost all of his investors. He went back, got more money, millions, and then COVID came along. He lost them all again. Then he linked up with Angel, and they have this crowdsourcing thing. And so, and Angel didn't mess with the plot or anything. But Linda and I signed up we're Angel Guild members at the highest level or something, and we're allowed to send it to anybody we want, and they're allowed to send it on. So akeele@gmail.com will get you a copy. But I also sent it to Chris.
Yeah, if you want to contact us, we can.
And they can send it that. I think you sent out the one for the 2-hour theater version, did you not?
Right.
As a lure or something? Rick?
Did your old man sequence make it into any of these?
No, actually, that's a good question, though. While I was over there, I was watching them film, and it was lovely stuff. We were doing it late at night, all night. In fact, in Lithuania in June, it's only dark from midnight to 4 a.m. And there was an awful lot of stuff running around the streets, in that film. And we were up watching that, and then we'd film all day. So it was horrifying. Well, one day they came to me and they said, "Here, go to the bus, the wardrobe bus. Have you ever been on a film set? It's amazing. They have hundreds of vehicles. They have these huge cranes with lights that go up and down. There's an administrative bus, a wardrobe bus, a makeup bus. Every actor has his own motorhome. It's plugged in and running, air conditioner going. They have a huge mess truck that comes and feeds you 3 meals a day. It's amazing." They said, "Go to the wardrobe bus and get a wardrobe." So they put this old baggy suit on me and a funny looking hat. And I'm in a couple of scenes. But they were scenes in 1949 when Carl came home from the prison camp. And I'm sitting across the Ferdinand McKay, who plays Carl, and he's looking out the window. And I'm reading a paper. And then I get off the train with my old suitcase and I meet apparently a granddaughter or some young woman, put my arm around her, and we leave. It turns out that that's going to maybe fit into a sequel, Rick. I'm glad you asked that. Because they're actually thinking of a sequel now, which follows Carl and the others, the survivors.
I'm excited.
And I don't know where, I have no idea where they are on it, or whether they're thinking of following him back to Salt Lake and finding the pushback from his sister and the pushback from the branch president who's still here. I don't know. But if they do a sequel, then they said they were going to put it in the 4-part series, and it was actually going to have a 5th part, which are omitted scenes. But I can assure you that it's not Oscar worthy. Yes, ma'am.
About what year did the church pull LDS missionaries out of Germany and
Yeah, I know that exactly.
and when did they reinstate missionaries?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Very good question. Because I did watch that other T.C. Christensen film, Escape from Germany. And actually, now that we're Angel Film Guilders, we get that one. I can watch it on my phone again. Although I always have a bad conscience because I know that my friend, what's his name, doesn't like it. But he didn't like the title. He thought it should be called Departure from Germany. But how exciting is Departure as opposed to Escape from? So it was in the summer. The attack on Poland was September 1st, 39, right? So it was in those last weeks, August and so forth, that the church was pulling those guys out. And so we know that pretty exactly. And they didn't get them all out either. That film concentrates on one mission. There was another mission, and some of those kids were sightseeing in Switzerland or something and had to be run down. But let me tell you one other thing on the end of that, and that is when Rudy was released from the camp, because remember, he has 10 years, right? 3 years go by, and he's still got 7. And this commission comes around to the camp they were in, which was on an island in the Elbe River called Hannover Sand. And they look at Rudy and they said, "No, you're staying in jail, kid." But they look at Carl, he only got 2 years to go, so he's served more than the majority. They say, "You're a German soldier, fella." So that's why he gets put in the German army. Used to say they had a uniform for him, but they didn't have uniforms anymore. And he got captured. And it's conventional to hear that he was captured by the Russians. It's not quite true. He was captured by Americans who immediately turned him over to the Russians. Then he spent 4 years out there. But Rudy promised God that he was going to go on a mission if he survived this mess. And 2 weeks later, the British liberated him. I'm told that they gave him a pistol and said, "Guard these guards," and they put the guards in the cells. That was just a short time, I think. But he went on a mission immediately. So we know that Rudy went on a mission immediately. Werner Sommerfeld did. So they were sending out people right immediately. When they got the Americans cranked up again, I'm not sure. Probably didn't take them too long. Because, Elder Ezra Taft Benson was tasked with going over there and directing the flow of goods that were flowing into Germany at that time. And the Mormons did a really good job at that. People in Canada were sending wheat and potatoes and an awful lot of stuff flowing in. They had a wealth of, it was an embarrassment of riches, actually. They split, a third of it went to the Catholics, a third went to the Protestants, a third went to the Mormons. Even that third was, when Carl got home back to Germany, he was in a hospital in Göttingen because they said, don't get off the train until it crosses the West German border. And so he got out, and he was very sick. He had an infection, and he was in a hospital there, and one of the big dangers was eating too much. He was only allowed a little bit, and so forth. And at some point, his brother got married. He said, I'm going to go to Hamburg for my brother's wedding. They said, you can't go. He said, I have to go. They said, well, sign this, absolving us of any liability. And he went there, and while he was there, they inundated him with new clothes and all kinds of stuff, canned goods, foods. So when he went back to the hospital, he went back with a man named Jean Wunderlich in his big DeSoto. No, it wasn't Wunderlich, it was somebody else. Can't remember his name. He was an American mission president, I think. He had a big DeSoto. And he had the trunk full of canned goods and so forth. And he went in there wearing this worn out prison garb with Russian felt boots called Valenkis and so forth. When he came back, he had new shoes, several pairs, a suit, new underwear, new shirts, new trousers, everything. He went in looking like a terribly shabby Ivan, he said, and came back looking like a wealthy Ami. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
I
Yeah.
was just going to say, I have
Melanie.
a little story I remember my mom telling about Ezra Taft Benson's visit to Germany
Yeah.
after the war. And he had to go, as you know, Germany was parceled up by the Allies, and
Right.
Britain had northern Germany.
That's right.
So he had to go to the British High Command to get permission to bring in
Oh, yeah.
all the relief.
Right.
And he went in, and at first this British general, I guess, was very resistant and wanted them to suffer, wanted the Germans
Oh, yeah.
to suffer. And Ezra Taft Benson was very angry about that. And the story goes that, he walks out of the door, he kind of storms out of the door, and then he walks back in one more time, and he says, I want to take a look one more time at a man who carries a whip in one hand and the Bible in the other. And then the
They
general,
softened the guy
then
up.
he relented
Oh, that's
and
cool.
allowed
Cool
them to bring
story.
it in. But I remember my mom saying
Yeah.
that so
Yeah.
distinctively,
Yeah.
with a whip in one hand and a Bible in the other.
That's very interesting. Thank you for that. Yeah, please.
You were talking about anachronisms earlier. My son and I have read some of the other books, The Price and Before the Blood Tribunal, and some of those things.
Good.
The one thing that was different in this, we haven't read your book yet, was that they portrayed Helmut as having turned in the other boys, but we didn't remember reading that in any of the other books.
Yeah.
Was
No,
that true or
no,
not?
it's an important question. It's an important point. You'll see in the film that they take it to the extreme. We know that Helmut was tortured, but only indirectly. Because when we found the documents, and typical German thoroughness, they existed, and Doug Tolbert found them in the called the American Documents Center. It turns out that after the war, the Germans had loaded up a bunch of those documents, put them in a train car, a train load of them, and then sent them down to a paper mill to be pulped. The American Army got there, stopped the train, backed the train up, took them to Berlin. But they didn't want to put them in some German archive, so they made their own archive called the American Documents Center. All those documents are now in the German Bundesarchiv. They're safe. But when we found these documents, we couldn't believe what we were seeing. And the book, one of the nice things about this book is it has all those documents in it. And we didn't have documents from the trial. Only we have Carl and Rudy's testimony of the trial. But it's accurate, by the way. And what you see in the film is very, very accurate. But the point is that we could tell when we read the documents, they were using euphemisms like this. We arrested this guy, Helmut Hübner, and after assiduous persuasion or something of that to that effect, he finally told us the names of his friends. The film takes that very literally and has listener, spoiler alert, pushing knives under his fingernails and things. But he didn't turn him in immediately, He really resisted. And when Carl saw him one time, they had this place called the Spiegelsaal, the Hall of Mirrors. It was a big white room. Carl, being a painter, tells us that it was painted with bright white, high-gloss paint. And it had bright lights, and it was blindingly bright in there. And that's where the people would have to stand between interrogations, and they'd have to stand on the wall with their nose to the wall. That's a theme that goes throughout Carl's book, is being forced to stand on the wall. And you notice in the film, the one guy shoves Carl's nose into the wall, and that actually happened to Carl. So it was good that the filmmakers put that in. But one point, and Carl was careful about this, he said they shouldn't have been doing that. They should not have allowed us to ever see each other. But at one point he said they made a mistake, and I went in there, and Helmut was standing next to the wall, and I was supposed to walk right behind him. And when he went by me, when I went by him, he smiled at me, and that smile meant I haven't sold you out. But he also could see how badly beaten he was. He was black and blue. And so we know from that he was beaten. I'm assuming from these euphemisms that I saw that it was bad, and that he finally did. Now the film also throws in the, I think, very interesting idea that they've got his girlfriend too. Why not, right? You want to make it as dramatic as possible. Good question. Yes.
So what about the officer you said his name that?
Oh, Evan Missner.
Yeah, towards the end he seemed to have
Yes.
sympathy for him. And
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. To me, he's the best actor in their thing. They're great acting. But to me, he's the best actor and the most interesting character. We found his name. They're in the documents. And the name of his partner, kind of a good cop, bad cop, Vangeman. But the film people did further research on those guys and found their first names, Evan Missner, what was Vangeman's name? Julius Vangeman. And they found out about something. One of them, and I'm not sure it was Missner, but one of them had lost a child in an air raid attack. And I don't know if it was Missner's or not, but so you have that human interest thing going on there a little bit, especially in the the four-part series. They take time to slow down a little bit and go a little more broadly into the lives of Vangeman and Missner, in their family lives and stuff. And you see Missner's, spoiler alert, you see Missner's son suffering from PTSD from the bombing raids and stuff, and having crying attacks and screaming fits and stuff. But what happens in the film, and I think this is brilliant film writing, there is a tiny little suspicion that it's possibly Missner who asked for clemency for Helmut. We know that he was asked, there were two organizations that filed for clemency. One was the Hitler Youth, and that's kind of understandable. Hey boys, come and join our club. The danger of you being beheaded is only, minimal. That's not a good look, so they wanted that not done. And I don't think I can overstress that the real, even in Nazi Germany, the terrible taboo to kill children, execute children. So you can understand the Hitler Youth, but it's odd that the Gestapo also put in a plea for clemency. They were turned down at the highest level, and we're not sure exactly what that means. Whether it'd be nice to know that Hitler himself said no, kill these guys. We don't know if it was that high, but we think it was pretty high. But there is a possibility that